everyone. Welcome to the Innovation Podcast.
Hi, Hannah.
We are here sitting on your couch on a lovely Monday afternoon. Is it Monday?
I believe it is.
I believe it is. Yeah,
Sunday,
for a minute. Because
2024.
right, okay, we all know. How are you doing?
Great. I love our conversations here, and I always find it so fascinating how it wanders. We do our prep, but let's see where it takes us this time.
Yeah, and I want to begin this one by a very different topic before we go to the actual one, which is Prince Charles' painting.
Yes.
What are your opinions? Because I chuckled because I was like, it's blood. How can you portray yourself drenched in freaking blood? That was my opinion. Well, what did you think?
I didn't think blood. I thought just symbology of the color. I saw it was pink rather than crimson red blood. I see more pinky.
Okay.
So I think it's sort of a man in touch with his feminine side and his heart, his love for the world. But is that maybe a bit naive and a bit soft? Because, well, I mean, to say that the royal family is about blood is just to point out the obvious. It's the bloodline, the blue bloodline, right? That's the concept of the royal families. It is inherited through birth, right? That's why Charles is king, because he was the eldest son of Queen Elizabeth. Right, so that's literally. And of course, we can say that there's blood on the hands of the monarchs. But what's your point? I mean, what were you thinking? Of course, there's blood on the hands of monarchs. That's what makes monarchs monarchs. That's what they do. They have then, from various perspectives, a legitimacy, or at least a claim to legitimacy for that. We can argue back and forth, whatever, but it is within the domain of monarchs to have blood on your hands. And I think that's just a real conversation to have about that.
I think we're walking on edges with this podcast today.
Walking on the edges of the pink painting. But I think it will be remembered. It is distinctive.
Maybe he was going for that.
Yeah.
Maybe he knew what he was doing.
Yeah, well, I'm sure
it's part conversation. I don't remember the painting of the Queen was about 70, 80 years ago, so I wouldn't know as well. But yeah. But any other monarch, for example, we don't really hear of their painting, but this one really created sparks. Okay. So I want to jump on the conversation that we're going to have is on Boeing.
Yes.
And I want to start with the opening line that they have 32 whistleblower complaints to OSHA. That's a huge number for a company that's been around for over 100 years. Thoughts?
Yeah, well, it seems like there's something going on there, right? And I think part of why I think we're interested in this is that we all get on Boeings.
Yes.
A feature I saw in John Oliver, where he did a good bit on Boeing, was that, the website Kayak, which is like a booking website, now has a feature where you can select not to fly on Boeing planes, or which Boeing plane you want to fly. So you want a 737, but not the MAX or whatever.
Yeah.
Right. So people, and this quick, and he was saying that they're actually making it more prioritized in their website because it's becoming more of a popular feature. So, I think there's that, that again, in its own ways, is a small indicator, but, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, that would never have been used, that feature, right, in any significant way. But today there is a concern because people are a little bit worried and scared, It's not only that planes are crashing, but when we find out why it is, for example, like the Lion Air flight in Indonesia, where the stalling system triggered it. And then it turns out the pilots weren't even trained on it because no one actually told about it. It's like
crazy.
That's just the stories that's coming out, but that's really crazy, right? And then kind of ask yourself that, in my mind, one of the things that was most shocking for me was the Volkswagen scandal, the Dieselgate, right? Where the German CEO is wanted by the US government and they're fighting to extradite him to the United States. So people don't realize this, right? But the former CEO of Volkswagen during this time if he goes to America, he'll be arrested and brought to America. Germany doesn't have an extradition treaty with America, so that's why they're not sending him over. But he's on trial in Germany, right? And basically what that represents is a massive industrial super producer, right?
Yeah.
One of the top one or number two car company in the world. And they lied about their emissions and their scandals, right? And so I think, we're seeing maybe this sort of element where the companies are sort of the peak of their industry have become sort of maybe the equivalent of a bank too big to fail. Like Volkswagen cannot fail in Germany, right? Boeing cannot fail in America. It's not going to happen. Right? Boeing cannot fail just from a military industrial complex point of view, let alone civil aviation. So maybe there's a similar sense of, what happened with the banks. When you're too big to fail, you spend your money carelessly and you get yourself to troubles like the subprime mortgage crisis of 2007, 2008, which did wreck the global economy, right? So maybe we're seeing a similar thing where that sort of, I don't know what the right word is, but that lack of oversight is resulting in gross negligence, if not criminal behavior, right? In Volkswagen's case, it was criminal behavior, right? They lied criminally for millions to be one of the top German engineers from Volkswagen is in jail in America for this. And so you end up with a situation where in the case of Volkswagen, they were criminals, right? They lied. And they're also terrible business people. Like the Volkswagen share price collapsed by half. You halve the value of your company. So you're not good at, you might somehow say, even though I don't agree with it, but you're like, oh, well, we made amoral, or we were criminals, but at least we made money. These guys were criminals and couldn't even make money, right? In the sense of really building a valuable company. Now, but from some perspectives, they did make money. They did maximize shareholder returns, right, in the short term, but it resulted in sort of catastrophic criminal behavior in the long term. So the set of incentives led it down that path. So I'm wondering if, what happened with Volkswagen and what happened with the banks, and especially in Western economic sectors, right, which is what we're looking at, Europe and America, this pattern is simply repeating itself. And so I think that's sort of what that represents to me is the edge of the management bureaucracy paradigm. And so what that means is, organizations today are organized around management bureaucracy. It's the org chart, right? You have the CEO at the top, C-suite, and then everyone else kind of finds their place in the hierarchy, right? And what its purpose is to produce value for shareholders, right? Maximize the shareholder profit, right? These kinds of things. But the problem is that becomes entirely meaningless drivel, really, because it's really about, in many ways, management capture and management enriching itself and its shareholders. So Boeing, for example, returned 90% of its profits, I believe, to shareholders, rather than investing in things like health and safety, right? And building good quality planes, right? So if you're spending 90% of your money buying back shares and not investing in your organization, then not on 1 year, but over a longer time period, thing quality is going to decline by definition, right? You're just not spending enough money. I'm not saying you should spend 100%. It's fine to do share buybacks. There's nothing wrong with that. But, the point of governance is to secure viability. And if you're only doing share buybacks and not investing in, advancing and progressing in health and safety, technology, and other critical areas, then you're negligent in securing the future of the company. And I think that's what we're kind of seeing here is that sort of challenge from, how do we address a situation where companies become so big that they cannot fail and create cultures that can result in what I would call the stagnation and corruption that creeps in and results in, for example, Volkswagen's case, criminal behavior, right? And the bank's case, sort of a bit borderline, right? But certainly negligent behavior that led to a global financial crisis, right? And now we look at what we may face as an aviation crisis, right? Maybe much worse than we know, right?
Well, my next question would be, tell us a little bit about Boeing, what's happening, Boeing, but you covered that. But, when you're talking about, you're seeing a new horizon of the end of the management bureaucracy, right? But don't you think that's the norm? Because is that the Panopticon loop, or what was it like after you've reached, then there's something called that you disrupt your own company and then you go back to learning. What is that term called?
Renewal?
Renewal? Is it renewal?
The renewal aspect of the loop, but
yes, where you sort of, you've reached your peak, you've learned everything you're supposed to learn, now you unlearn everything and then you...
I think renewal would be the good term to use that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Because you're not deliberately, it's a bit like maybe the idea that at the end of when the farmer has harvested the crops, you would maybe burn the crops and the field goes to less life, right?
Yes.
The seed, you plant the seeds, you water the seeds, the plant grows. So that if you map out those metrics, you're getting a data set of growth, right? But in the renewal cycle, you're not growing. You're allowing the debt to decay and we get the field to freshen up for a new cycle of growth. And so the renewal phase is different because it's about a different set of behaviors. There's not push more profit and do all this kind of stuff. There has to be a sense of getting a restoration, I think.
Right.
Realignment and recalibration.
Right. And I think that's where they're going, or companies go, because when I was watching a documentary on Boeing, they were showing in the early days how people were very, very proud of working with Boeing. And because they were sort of out on this innovative journey that no one was doing it. And they were very proud of wearing the T-shirt and things like that. And that time I was sort of relating to those people's emotion because I was like, imagine being part of something that's going to be great, or you're on that journey, right? So they all cared, I would say, at the beginning, and I think eventually the company, as you're saying, that they're sort of focusing on shareholders' profit. But isn't that what happens to everyone eventually, right?
Yes. Well, that's, I think, why this term stagnation is a useful one. That's what happens. Great things are done, right? There's this ancient quote from the Romans, right, which is, or maybe even further, right, which is this: hard times build strong men. Strong men bring good times. Good times bring soft men. Soft men bring weak times. And, and I think what's important in this is to recognize the cyclical nature of this in the sense that there's both hard and soft. yes, we might have a call to like, be strong and build all of this. But for example, I was reading an article from China this morning where it's sort of about reporting on this idea that the younger generation are disengaging from the workplace and how there was a large scandal that broke out because the senior lady leader at Baidu, the Google of China, basically talked about how you should always sleep with your phone next to you, and if you do what it takes, and that's just what hard corporate culture is, and if you don't like it, I'm not your mom. I'm not here to tell you. You need to manage yourself. If you want to be the best, you're going to work really hard to make that happen. So there's sort of a hard line. And that approach has certainly succeeded, and I think it's one of the reasons why the China is such an extraordinary story of development, that they have brought this hardness, right? China was facing hard times.
Mm-hmm.
Those hard times produce strong men and women.
Mm-hmm.
Those strong leaders then build good times. But now the good times, it's not about building softness. It's that the hardness can make you sick, right? I think that's a lot of what the challenge is in China. So many people are just exhausted. They're overworked. They don't find life meaningful. They are disengaged. And you can see that in metrics like, for example, the birth rate, right? You can see things in number of suicides. You can see all kinds of like data sets there. And so you kind of want to ask yourself, how do we keep making sure that this succeeds? And that's where there needs to be an invitation to softness. So softness is necessary. If you're always hard, eventually you'll just break. So you need a softness, you need a renewal, you need a recovery. But then that will then inevitably become a little bit too comfortable, a little bit too complacent. I mean, look at Google versus ChatGPT, right? Google since the last decade or two, for sure, had like 80% of all AI researchers in the world working for it, especially like at Google DeepMind and Google Brain. Like it was by far the leading category, and then it got its ass kicked by ChatGPT, a bunch of 100 guys, give or take, right? I mean, that's extraordinary that you could just overlook, become so sleepy and complacent, right? Soft times at Google, and those soft times are probably going to bring hard times, and then the cycle will renew itself.
Yeah.
And I think it's important not to come at this from a moralistic point of view. It's just the nature of change itself. It will always be like that. So it's more about maybe riding the rhythm and understanding when it's time to be hard and when it's time to be soft. And, so how might we apply that to Boeing? A key indicator in the maturity of the organization to generate the state of consciousness it needs to really move on from this is its capacity to talk about it. What we saw on Volkswagen, for example, is that they could not talk about it. Mm-hmm. And they kept lying, and they kept misleading, and they kept it got worse and worse and worse. And so that really destroyed a lot of trust, and it just really was very bad. And I don't think Boeing is in a position to talk about it either. It's also unfortunate that two of the whistleblowers seem to have had unexpected mishaps that result in them losing their lives, which also raised a lot of questions, right? Two of the Boeing whistleblowers have passed away unexpectedly. And so, that kind of raises questions too, right? It'll be interesting to see what happens next in this
documentary.
Well, I mean, who knows, right? But I think what we should remain focused on is are the planes that we fly on safe, right?
Yeah, number one.
At a very, very sort of humdrum, boring, but seriously, is this plane going to be okay? I mean, I'm at a point where I would be tempted to just take Airbus of the search section because I don't care that much. I'm not pro Boeing.
Yeah.
I'm not pro Airbus in the sense that, I have to, but if you're like, okay, you can fly these guys Airbus, they're going to be fine. Or you can fly these guys Boeing. You're probably going to be fine, but it could be catastrophically bad. And right now they're experiencing a large increase in crashes and things. I just would deselect Boeing and fly Airbus. It doesn't cost me anything.
Yeah.
And I'd have peace of mind. So, because there was this phrase that apparently was passed around, which is originally, if it ain't Boeing, I'm not going. Which meant I want to fly Boeing, right? But now I think it's the other way around. It's like, if it's a Boeing, I ain't going. Right? That might come about. And then what that could then be leveraged, because how I'd expect that then might work out is the Chinese are trying to launch their own national make aviation company, right? They already have a model in works. I think they're about to, I think they've just started to make sales at the Middle Eastern aircraft.
So what are companies we have right now? We have Airbus, we have Boeing, and then who else are there?
Well, it's always been Boeing and Airbus. They're like by 90% of the market, by far the first. But then there's Embraer from Brazil. So the smaller and medium-sized jets. Mm-hmm. That's an area they've quite established quite well. Is there a Canadian company?
Like, I'm trying to remember tickets. They usually will put, right, like, what's the plane you're flying? I can't remember.
But it's mostly Boeing and Airbus, right? And I think, but that's where, this...
And I almost tempted to go check my ticket, my next flight. What is it? What? A Boeing? Or is it an Airbus? I think it's an Airbus, but yeah.
Like, what worries me is not that there's incidents. I can understand as much as I don't want to accept it, but look, you make a lot of planes. They're very complex. Things can go wrong. I get that. Okay. It's not an irrational thing. It's not unacceptable in the sense that it can happen. But once, but if it keeps happening and it seems to be very difficult to talk about it happening with a reluctance to acknowledge that it's happening, that's a different matter. It's like, it's okay if you're having a bit of a problem, but if you refuse to talk about the problem, even though everyone's telling you you have a problem, it's like saying, hey, Manny, maybe you should just go see a therapist and just have a chat and just find some balance. Being like, no, I don't need a therapist. You need a therapist, And then, your friends start disappearing every time they mention the therapist, and it's a bit weird and strange things happen, right? So
It's happening,
yeah. But I do kind of, I do see this sort of malaise, particularly in the Western world, where the modernist project of creating these organizations that maximize shareholder return have in them deep gaping voids of meaninglessness. They are just structures where you can spend 20 years and the next day you get fired and that's it. There's no meaning and sense of loyalty. There's no sense of creating something that's worthy. It's just pure commercialization now. And I'm not trying to be like, oh, that's bad or good, I just note that the problem with it is meaningless. And what it becomes, then it collapses into ego.
Yeah.
And it's sort of my territory versus your territory. And we lose sight of progress and we lose sight of advancing the human species. It's just astonishing, right? Like Tesla builds the electric car. Volkswagen lies about its engine technology. You can have a more iconic difference. Volkswagen could have taken all the energy it was put into lying and made electric cars, or I don't know, hydrogen cars. Like, they chose one set of behaviors, a state of consciousness, to criminally lie, to be negligent, to not care. They chose that path very intentionally versus the other path of seeking progress, right? And you have to see that very clearly. That was decided at the highest level of the company, right, by the CEO. This is why he's facing criminal charges, right? So, this is what I try and emphasize. It's like, it's not a joke, right? These guys are really being led into the darkness, right? And are making terrible decisions, right? And then you could also see it, for example, but to kind of make it a bit more about the spirit of things, Boeing has been making rockets for America for a very long time, since I think the entire rocket age. I believe they built the Apollo rockets to go to the moon.
They did.
So now they're getting their asses kicked by SpaceX. I think it's something like SpaceX is 80 to 90%. I think it's about 80%. 80% of all rockets launched every year is just one company. Boeing's nowhere near. They've been, SpaceX built the Dragon capsule, which is the bit on top of the rocket that has the astronauts and materials to fly to the space station, for example. Boeing have been trying to build theirs for years. It's still not ready yet. Still not tested. They still haven't got it functional. They were trying to do a launch a week or two ago, but it got cancelled because of a helium leak, I believe.
Oh.
Yeah, so it's kind of like, where is this cutting edge?
Yeah, and when we talk about Volkswagen and then the emission that they lied about, it's criminal, and also they've crossed that ethical barrier, isn't it? Yeah. So when you're talking about meaningless pursuit, it's almost as if that when they've reached that point, there is no barrier between ethics.
Yes.
And doing that's ethics, right? So because right now you're dealing with human lives, and you literally mentioning Boeing, and up until before this podcast, I had no idea where Boeing was and then the safety of it. And I'm literally, all I'm thinking about is after this podcast, I'm going to check then my next plane and whether it's a Boeing or an Airbus, because you're really concerned about safety, especially now that, you're carrying a baby and whatnot.
So you're a mum now.
So yeah, so your level of thinking is a bit higher.
And that's sort of where, these guys, then decisions are being made about that.
Yeah.
So then there's an intentionality, right? You see here, pathway, you prefer cost cutting over health and safety, right? For example, whatever it is.
But a little bit of a contradiction here. I almost think it's kind of a karma thing, because they built the plane that dropped the bombs in Hiroshima, right? Don't you think karma has a little bit of hand into it?
Undoubtedly.
Yeah.
Undoubtedly, yeah.
Because every article just mentioned that same thing, like Boeing built the plane that dropped the bomb, and
yeah, but they also, how much good have their planes done? Boeing also built the planes that have carried us to see our families, to amazing holidays, to make work trips happen, right? So I find that a bit exaggerated, to be honest.
You find that exaggerated compared to 230 million people being killed and people still living with cancer and like...
Well, I believe actually it was 100,000, roughly, per drop. 60 to 80 to 100,000, not 230 million.
No, not 230 million, 230,000, sorry. Yes. That's a million? Oh, okay, sorry. 230,000.
Yes. So both bomb tests, of course, and that's obviously that's terrible, right? Germany also suffered these things.
Yeah.
Right. We also had many people, we didn't get nuked, but the destruction was equivalent. And, well, don't start a war if you can't fight it, can't win it. Japan made its decision to do a Pearl Harbor, right? So, and they had made it very clear that they would keep fighting till the end, that they were not going to surrender. So the Americans were going to have to invade the Japanese homeland and then fight a bloody, bloody battle where hundreds of thousands of American lives would be spent.
Mm-hmm. What do you think of that controversy that says that America did their own Pearl Harbor? It was sort of an act for them to get into the war. I know we're getting really off topic here, but let's touch that a bit and then we come back to Boeing.
I mean, maybe, maybe there's elements. I think the truth, it's rare that truth is so clear.
Yeah.
So, was it a master manipulation plan? I doubt it. Did they hear some rumors that maybe the Japanese would attack? Probably. But does that mean they're actually going to fucking do it? The logistics of it are just mind-blowing, right? The Pacific Ocean is half of planet Earth. So they sail from the Japanese side to the middle bit. So they sailed at least roughly a quarter around the Earth with a couple of carriers. I don't know how many, less than 10.
How many days were that? Do you have an idea?
It's like 20 days.
20 days?
20, 30 days. It's like at the very edge of what's humanly possible. So...
More days? I thought it was like half a year. No, that's too much.
No, that's sailing ships.
So they went by plane.
So they're sailing the fleet, right? So the Japanese have mainly aircraft carriers and then some other support vessels, but it's an airstrike. It's not cannon shooting the land, it's planes dropping bombs with the objective of disabling the US Pacific Fleet. And the objective was to destroy the Pacific Fleet, destroy the port facilities so that the Americans could no longer use Hawaii and would instead have to launch their navy from the West Coast, so from LA and San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
And since now you're on the half of planet Earth away from Japan, war is much harder. And the Japanese have an advantage in the Pacific theater because the Americans have to sail their military across the entire Pacific Ocean to get there. So it's an extremely audacious move. It's a very bold move. And, I think it was on 21st of December, right? So Christmas is coming up. Everyone has Christmas on Hawaii. I mean, it sounds perfect, right? There's a war in Europe, but there's no war in Asia, and it's very sleepy. It's a perfect time to launch a surprise attack. And it was very devastating. So I think it was very shocking to the Americans. And because it's also worth remembering that America had pursued an isolationist policy. We live in a world where America is the guarantor of peace and gets itself involved in Afghanistan, Iraq, and many other places. And you can argue about it whether it's right or wrong, but at least it is involved. And if Big Daddy America wasn't there with his big stick beating the crap out of anyone else who got in the way, there would be a lot more conflict, I believe, in this world, right? And I think that's the supremacy of American firepower is what secures the peace in the world today.
Because you're scared of that.
Yes, his American military is so superior to everybody else, you have no chance. America's military budget is larger than every other country on Earth combined. So it's even bigger, right? So, and of course, the expertise and everything else around that. So but that wasn't America in the 30s. America in the 30s was just coming out of the Great Depression, 1931, right? So they just come out of that. They were like, oh my, they'd seen World War I, so they're bloody Europeans, another war. We're not getting involved. That's why they didn't get involved. And it could have been a world where the Nazis conquered Britain if they had. If the Nazis had conquered Britain, it's very likely that there would have been a Nazi empire till today. Because America would not invade Nazi Europe. Plus, an operation across the Atlantic Ocean is essentially unfeasible. And with Europe unified under this sort of Nazi empire, with no one able to stand in their way, there's only Russia in the east. And the Russians, at least, it would have been a stalemate at best. Right? Probably the Germans would have won. And then that would have been that. So, it's really interesting how history turns on these sort of different concepts of what happened there. And I think something like Pearl Harbor is just a reminder of how differently life can go. So I don't believe in the conspiracy theory. I think they knew some things were happening, but, it's level. Do they actually know that a full strike capability is coming out and it's going to wreak the damage that it actually does? No, I don't think they knew that. I think it really scared them. And I think they really woke up.
Okay. So, and as we're going towards the end, let's go back to Boeing and let me ask the question on what do you think is next for Boeing?
Well, life will go on. They're still going to be Boeing. We're still going to fly Boeing planes. They're just so a part of the system, right? So that I think is worth noting, right? They're going to keep building military industrial complex stuff. They're going to keep building planes. There'll be some questions around, does this provide an opportunity for the Chinese to present their organization? So the way Boeing handled this will have ramifications beyond the immediate. It will be seen by other global customers, and maybe they'll start buying Chinese planes to diversify. Can't trust the Americans too much, right? Don't want to trust the Reliance. We can also trust the Chinese, spread it out a little bit. So I could see that happening. And I think, they kind of want to kind of come to a conversation with themselves about what kind of organization do they want to be? Do they want to be one that maximizes shareholder returns, or do they want to be something more than that? What might that be? How might you reconnect with the human spirit? Return to that spirit with which Boeing was founded, that great desire to advance humanity forward using the power of technology, specifically in aviation, and to give us the wings to reach out to the heavens, right? That's really an opportunity that Boeing has to restore that state of inspiration to itself and its people, to use this crisis as a mechanism for self-transformation into an organization that has a greater sense of stewardship and responsibility for the future. So I think that's an opportunity for it, and that will only come about through some difficult conversations. So you have to have the courage to do that and then move on from it. So I think that's really the space where they're going to find themselves at. It's like, are you willing to have the conversations? Are you ready to acknowledge different things? Are you able to take these lessons forward to be able to be that better organization and actually demonstrate being a better organization? So less plane crashes, less doors flying out, right? And that's also a key metric.
I like how the previous podcast was ending on a very positive note on AI and the possibilities of things. And this one is about, are you going into fear? Are you going to darkness? Or are you going to step out into the light, right? That's the only two possibilities I'm seeing here for Boeing.
Well, I think that's a helpful way to structure it, because there's so much complexity, but in the end it is that. Yeah. And you fall in a bit too much in the darkness when people are dying because of what you're doing. And there just needs to be a sense of responsibility around that.
I don't even think it's about people dying. It's just about the fear. Now you're going to have fear, right? As you said, you're going to just untick a few boxes just to go on Airbus. It doesn't cost you anything, right? So it's about fear. So you're creating an atmosphere of fear.
Yeah.
Right? All right, Jan, this has been fun. And I hope...
Fun to go into the darkness.
Now you have put fear in me. But yeah, let's see what happens. We're chatting with you, and thank you to our listeners for listening to us so far.